Hi, I'm Jackie Kelm, the joy engineer and author of 2 books on appreciative living. And today I'm here to talk to you about something I call emotional flatlining, which is the inability to experience any positive emotion at all. Now, this is also called anhedonia in the therapy world, and basically you can feel no positive emotions. You can't feel love or connection, and your life is totally and completely flat. And it doesn't matter what happens. You could win the lottery, you could have a very dear friend who's very excited about just getting engaged and telling you the story, and you would feel absolutely nothing. It wouldn't matter what happens, your life just feels completely flat and dead emotionally. And this happened to me after taking massive antibiotics for a very serious and life-threatening leg infection. And I had absolutely no idea what was going on at the time. It was the craziest thing. I had been a self-help expert for over 10 years, and I had worked with thousands of people helping them get happier. And here I was, all of a sudden, I could not feel any positive emotion. And none of the things that I knew and had learned from the past helped. Now, my story is long and involved, and I have an entire program that I was able to create to actually overcome the anhedonia. And you can learn more about that at my website at www.getjoyback.com. But what I want to talk to you about today is what is emotional flatlining, and in particular, how does it differ from depression? And so what I have for you today is what I call the emotional flatlining top 10. And before I go any further, let me just explain that I am not a therapist or a mental health professional, and I'm also not a neuroscience. I'm just sharing what I learned that has been helpful for me in the hopes that perhaps it will help you and others. But these are very serious conditions, and if you think you have flatlining or anhedonia, you do need to seek professional help. Okay, so the first characteristic of emotional flatlining is that your brain neurologically cannot produce a positive feeling. Now, this is different from depression, where you may have a reduction in feelings or a reduction in positive feelings. With flatlining, you literally and physiologically cannot produce a positive feeling. And so this is a neurological condition that, again, I not only want to distinguish from depression, but I also want to distinguish from anhedonia. Because in the therapy world, anhedonia is a great reduction in interest or a great reduction in positive feeling. But with emotional flatlining, it's a complete absence. Again, it's a physiological inability to produce any kind of positive emotion whatsoever. And this brings us to the second characteristic, which is that flatlining is independent of depression. It can't exist with or without it. And this is different from anhedonia in the therapy world, which is believed to be a part of depression. Now, I did have both depression and flatlining in the beginning, and I think for many people they do have both together, because it's very hard to lose all of your positive feelings, lose interest in everything, and not get depressed. But what happened to me is I was able to overcome my depression, and I talk all about that on my website. And then at that point, I was very high functioning, I felt very good, I had a lot of energy, but I was completely and totally dead flat emotionally. And I still had total emotional flatlining with no depression. And this brings us to characteristic number 3. With flatlining, you can still feel negative emotions, but they might be blunted or they might be dull. And that's the killer with this. You can't feel any positive emotion, but often you can feel sadness or frustration or anger. So that makes it even more frustrating. Now, having said that, there were 1 or 2 people I came across who actually were able to feel very slight positive emotion in one particular area, such as music. But it was very, very minor. It was nothing like before they had the flatlining, and by far was the exception. For most people, they experience this flatness in all areas of life. Now again, this might sound like depression, but if you look at characteristic number 4, what happens is that you lose the ability to feel interest, and therefore you lose interest in everything. So very subtle difference between that and depression, because with depression you might have a drop in your interest level. You may not feel like doing things. But with anhedonia, you can't experience the feeling of interest, if that makes sense. And another way of saying it is with depression, you don't care anymore, but with flatlining, you can't care anymore. And this brings us to characteristic number 5. Often there are memory and cognitive issues associated with flatlining. And I have found this to be true for most of the people that I have worked with and that have come to the website. Because the areas of the brain that are associated with flatlining, I believe, are the prefrontal cortex and the reward center. These are the areas that have been identified in anhedonia. And these areas are also responsible for helping us with our memory and to help us think more clearly. So it makes sense that when this feeling part of our brain breaks down, we also lose some of this cognitive function as well. And this brings us to number 6. When you try to explain it to people, they can't understand. And this is one of the most difficult things of all, because it makes you feel so alone with your flatlining. And sometimes what's even worse is people think they understand, and they'll say things like, well, I had a time when I felt really flat, or I really had no interest. And what you realize is they're talking about depression, and it's not at all what you're experiencing with flatlining. And that can be very, very frustrating. And in fact, some therapists really don't understand this distinction as well. So it's something that makes you feel very alone when you have it. And what I would like to do now is just share one example, again, of how this differs from depression, because often I find when people come to the site and they first look at it, they think they have depression. So again, I really want to try to distinguish how this is different. So let's say a mother is coming home from the hospital with a new baby. And often women will sometimes experience postpartum depression at that time. And so let's say there's a mother with postpartum depression and she's feeding her baby and she's looking down, and she maybe had been feeling relatively down that day, kind of flat and not very connected to her child. But all of a sudden the baby looks up at her and looks her right in the eye for just a brief moment, a very tender moment. Now, a mother with depression would feel a sense of connection towards that baby for just an instant. And it wouldn't be as much as if she didn't have the depression, but for a brief instant, she would feel a little something when she looked at her child. A mother with emotional flatlining would look into that child's eyes and not be able to feel any love or connection. And not only that, but she would be devastated by that, because she would know she should be feeling something and she can't feel anything. So it's a very, very disturbing experience. And this kind of thing happens all the time for people with flatlining. Again, it's not a reduction in the feeling, it's an inability to produce them. And this lack of positive emotion, again, for most people, extends into all areas of life. You can't enjoy music, beauty, art. You have even intimacy. There's absolutely no pleasure from intimacy. And going on vacation becomes pointless. You have no interest in going on vacation. You can't look forward to it. And if you go, you can't enjoy it. And it's actually more upsetting because you can't enjoy it. So in many ways, your life starts to feel very meaningless. And again, the distinction with depression, because with depression, you also can have your life feel very meaningless. But the difference with flatlining is your life is meaningless because you can't feel. It isn't because your life itself feels meaningless. Again, a very subtle distinction. And the really interesting thing is number 8. You cannot feel grief. Grief is an emotion that typically we think of as being a negative emotion. But in fact, in order to feel grief, you have to care about somebody, or you have to feel a sense of connection. And with flatlining, you cannot feel any caring or connection, and therefore you cannot grieve. And this is also very upsetting. If somebody close to you dies or something happens, you cannot grieve that loss. So taking all this together, you end up doing characteristic number 9, which is you fake positive emotions around others. So you pretend to care when you're talking to somebody when you really don't. Or you smile when you don't find it funny. And again, with depression, sometimes we'll do this, we'll fake feeling more up than we really feel. But what's different, again, with flatlining is that you are faking actually having the emotion itself, rather than faking feeling more up than you are or feeling more positive than you are. And so what you end up having to do as well is number 10, where you have to think your way through relationships, doing what you know you should be doing, because you can't feel. So you look at your children, you can't feel any love or connection for them, but you know as a mother you should be doing certain things, and so you hug them at the right times, or you kiss them at the right times. Same thing for your spouse and your friends and all your relationships. You intellectually think about what you should be doing if you could feel, if you could care. And you do that because you want to maintain your relationships. So now I've taken all these together to create a definition for what I call positive emotional flatlining. And it's this. It's a neurological condition that causes a physiological inability to produce emotions with positive feelings, such as joy, happiness, gratitude, interest, excitement, connection, love, caring, positive anticipation, and grief. It can also cause a blunting or diminished ability to experience negative emotions, and it's a distinct condition from depression that may or may not coexist alongside it. Now, I know for any of you who are new to this, who have never heard of this and are not experiencing it, this probably sounds crazy, because who would have ever thought there's a condition where you can't produce a positive feeling? I mean, we all think that you can produce positive feelings. It's just a question of how strong they are or how often you feel them. So this really is a very, very bizarre thing to have to go through if you've been through it. And as I said, I was the joy engineer. I had been helping people get happier for 10 years. And here I was with no positive emotion whatsoever. Nothing that I did worked. And it took me 8 months to find out there was a term called Anhedonia that was pretty close to what I was experiencing. And that was a real turning point. But unfortunately, I had a lot of trouble finding answers for how to deal with it. So I ended up creating my own program based on neuroscience and all the things that I had learned from my appreciative living work, and I was able to overcome it and help others as well. And that's what I'm passionate about doing now. And so if you or anyone you know has emotional flatlining, or you think they might, please visit the website at www.getjoyback.com, and you'll find all kinds of resources there to help you and more information about what I did to overcome it. I hope this information was really helpful for you, and my greatest passion is to help everyone find and create a life of joy. Bye for now.